Hey everyone, welcome back to the Incredible India podcast series. I'm Taylor, and joining me today for what I think is a really insightful deep dive is Sam.
Hi, Taylor. It's great to be back. Yeah, today we're opening the vault, so to speak, on a kingdom that really, well, it almost defies easy categorization. We're talking about the princely state of Hyderabad and its legendary rulers, the Nizams.
Exactly. And our mission today is to take you deep into the sources we have about this kingdom. I mean, we're looking at a court whose wealth and influence are just staggering, and its global connections, especially with the Ottoman Empire. It made Hyderabad a real geopolitical player, potentially rivaling European empires back in the early 20th century.
We really need to set the scene, maybe around 1912. We often think of geopolitical power as this simple binary East versus West, London versus Istanbul. But history, well, it often hides these other options, doesn't it? The Nizams of Hyderabad commanded a kingdom so rich, so strategically vital, that its ruler was actually treated as an equal by the Ottoman Sultan himself.
And the detail just immediately grabbed me. I mean, it's the sheer, almost audacious scale of their wealth. The last Nizam, Mir Osman Ali Khan, he was at one point recognized as the richest man on earth. And this is the man who supposedly treated the world's fifth largest diamond, the Jacob diamond, like a simple paperweight. Can you imagine?
That image, it's just that incredible contrast, right, between the object's immense value and the casualness of
Yeah.
its use. It's the perfect starting point for what we're exploring today, what we're calling the Royal Paradox of Hyderabad. It was a place where unimaginable wealth actually funded deep intellectual pursuits and where intense global diplomacy somehow blended seamlessly with local Deccani poetry.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that wealth first.
Yeah.
Where did it all come from? Because
Mhm.
the names of the gems involved are just. They're legendary in the history of global jewelry. The Nizams were the inheritors of the Golconda mines, weren't they?
The Golconda mines, absolutely legendary. They were the source, the raw material for global power for centuries. We're talking about the origin point for the Kohinoor, the Hope Diamond, the Orlov. I mean, these are world-famous stones. This wasn't just, profitable mining. This was controlling the definitive source of portable global wealth.
That brings up an interesting question, though. If the British Raj was, consolidating control across India during this time, how much of that wealth did the Nizam really control? Or was it becoming more, well, symbolic by then?
That's a really crucial distinction. And actually, the Nizams maintained a startling degree of fiscal and administrative autonomy, precisely because of this colossal material leverage they held. So when Mir Osman Ali Khan used the Jacob diamond valued today at, what, hundreds of millions?
Mm.
As a paperweight, it was a subtle statement. It signaled that this level of opulence was just like the air they breathed. It wasn't a display they needed to prove anything.
I see.
This wealth was collateral. It gave him real geopolitical maneuvering room, forcing everyone, including the British, to tread a bit lightly.
Fascinating. So this wasn't just about showing off internally. The gold, the gems, they were the actual currency of global status. And that status leads us, well, directly to the really unique part of this story, the Ottoman connection.
Exactly. Well, a lot of focus is rightly put on their relationship with London and the British Empire. The Nizams cultivated this very warm and I'd say highly strategic relationship with the Ottoman Empire, which was, you have to remember, the political and spiritual heart of the wider Islamic world at the time. This was a deliberate cultural and geopolitical bridge they were building.
And we have actual proof of this diplomacy, right? The sources mention continuous exchanges, letters, envoys, quite elaborate gifts, passed between the Nizams, particularly Mir Osman Ali Khan, and his predecessor Mahbub Ali Pasha, and the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid II.
Yes, the archival material is pretty amazing. It's scattered between Istanbul and Hyderabad, written in these beautiful scripts, Persian and Ottoman Turkish. And what's fascinating is that these aren't just, polite "how are you" letters. They reveal a relationship built on deep mutual respect and, I think, a shared political vision.
A shared vision. And that resulted in a pretty rare honor for an Indian ruler, didn't it?
Mhm.
What was that title given to Mahbub Ali Pasha?
It was incredibly significant. The Sultan conferred the title Faithful Ally of the Caliph. Now, for our listeners, the Caliphate was the symbolic continuation of the Islamic world's ultimate political and religious leadership. So, getting this title, it was basically the Ottoman acknowledgement of Hyderabad, not just as some wealthy client state, but as a sovereign global power within that larger Islamic sphere. A huge deal.
Wow. Okay. And that geopolitical clout, that status, It was really put to the test during the First World War, wasn't it?
Hmm.
This is where the story gets complex, because the Nizam was officially allied with the British, yet the Caliphate, the Ottomans, were on the opposing side. What did he do? It must have been a tricky position.
Oh, absolutely. It was a definite tightrope walk. Despite his official alignment with the British, the Nizam, Mir Osman Ali Khan, took extraordinary political and financial risks. He extended vast sums of money to the, well, by then collapsing Ottoman Caliphate. And
Ah.
this wasn't just a small donation. He funded the welfare of Ottoman soldiers, poured money into restoring historic mosques in Istanbul and Jerusalem.
Even while allied with Britain.
Even while allied with Britain, it wasn't just charity, it was a powerful global political statement. It asserted his independent identity, his standing.
That is such a critical piece of context. It really confirms that the Nizams were consciously looking beyond just Delhi and London. They were seeking models for modernity that could integrate their faith and foster progress, maybe inspired by Istanbul.
Precisely. They really admired the Ottomans' attempt, flawed as it might have been, to modernize while holding onto cultural integrity. And they consciously brought that kind of blueprint back to the Deccan. That fusion became the heart of that unique Deccani culture. We see a blend of Persian refinement, Mughal structure, Ottoman vision, all layered beautifully over local Telugu traditions.
Okay, so having sort of secured his global position through this careful diplomacy and, well, staggering wealth, the Nizam then turned his attention inward, understanding that true sovereignty also needed a modern, self-sustaining state, built using those same vast resources.
Which brings us to what we called opulence with purpose.
Yes, this is where you see the wealth being channeled very strategically. Hyderabad was functionally like a self-contained empire within the British Raj. It was among the very first princely states to have its own railway system, self-regulating, its own currency, the Hyderabadi rupee, its own postal system.
Wow.
They were fusing that elegance we talked about with serious modern progress. And their investment in institutions sounds foundational. You mentioned Osmania University, named after the Nizam, obviously, but you're saying it was inspired by those Ottoman ideals of secular intellectual education.
That seems to be the case. They weren't just building a local college. They wanted to create a center of learning that was genuinely globally relevant, a modern university.
And you see that same ambition in their public works, too, right? Like the architecture and healthcare.
Definitely. Look at the Osmania General Hospital. It was funded by the Nizam, and it's famous for these magnificent, huge Indo-Saracenic domes. The sources suggest those architectural choices were quite deliberate. They weren't just mimicking local styles. They were consciously referencing the grandeur, the architectural power of Istanbul's great mosques and public buildings.
Which makes the paradox we hinted at even more dramatic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
On one hand, you have this monumental building program, funding armies, courts where guests reportedly dined from solid gold plates, under imported Belgian chandeliers, listening to orchestras playing Persian melodies in palaces like Falaknuma, the Mirror of the Sky. Just incredible luxury.
The grandeur was, by all accounts, overwhelming. But then we arrive at the personal lifestyle of Mir Osman Ali Khan himself, the richest man in the world who maintained this striking, almost jarring personal simplicity. This is the real aha moment, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Why? Why would a man who could literally afford thousands of new suits wear the same clothes for years? What was that about?
Well, the accounts suggest it was almost a philosophical statement. The last Nizam was known for his frugality, his personal restraint. Despite controlling, arguably the world's greatest stash of diamonds, he reportedly wore the same frayed fez cap for years on end. He was an accomplished poet, a scholar, someone who apparently preferred writing and, get this, repairing his own pens to any kind of extravagant personal consumption.
It's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? He controls this global superpower of wealth, this immense treasury, yet chooses an almost ascetic personal life. It's fascinating.
I think it balanced the overwhelming grandeur of his state, perhaps deliberately. His personal humility maybe suggested that the true power of Hyderabad, it didn't just reside in the gold sitting in the vaults, but maybe in the intellect, the wisdom that governed how those resources were used. The wealth was for the state,
Yeah.
for the universities, the hospitals, the infrastructure, not necessarily for his own personal vanity.
That emphasis on intellect, on culture, over just raw materialism, that really seems to be what makes the Nizam's legacy endure, doesn't it? As you say, the structures aren't just relics, they feel like living stories.
Exactly right. Hyderabad today still kind of hums with this Nizami grace, this particular atmosphere. When you visit the Charminar or the Chamahala Palace or Purani Haveli, You're not just looking at old buildings. You're seeing architecture that was consciously designed, built to communicate global power, yes, but also cultural depth and sophistication.
And you can still trace that global influence in the city's culture today, can't you? Like the bangles in Lad Bazaar.
Yeah, the shimmering glass bangles sold in Lad Bazaar, for example, they really do recall the Ottoman glass lamps that were once exchanged as these high-status diplomatic gifts between Hyderabad and Istanbul.
Little echoes of that connection.
Little echoes, exactly. And, of course, maybe the most famous example, the city's culinary masterpiece. The Hyderabadi biryani. It wasn't just some spontaneous invention. It was developed, refined in those royal kitchens, expertly fusing Persian and Turkish cooking techniques with local Deccani spices. It literally embodies the fusion culture that the Nizams championed.
And it feels like the Nizam's contribution to global history is finally getting more recognition now, beyond just dusty historical records. Their spectacular jewels travel for these huge global exhibitions, drawing millions, and historians are still poring over those diplomatic letters, really trying to understand their role as genuine global statesmen operating way beyond just the shadow of the British Raj.
I think what this deep dive ultimately reveals, the profound message maybe of Hyderabad, is that culture, intellect, beauty, these things could build empires just as enduring, and arguably maybe more sophisticated than any empire built purely through military conquest. To visit Hyderabad today is really to walk across that physical bridge between the Indian subcontinent and the wider Islamic world, a place where ancient opulence meets modern aspiration is quite unique.
It's a truly remarkable, sophisticated chapter in world history. Thank you so much for guiding us through this really fascinating deep dive into the history and legacy of the Nizams.
Always a pleasure. It's an incredible story.
If you decide to travel to Hyderabad, perhaps after hearing this, we do have a recommendation. Five Senses Tours organizes tours across India which are immersive cultural experiences. You can email them at contact@fivesensestours.com. That's contact at the numeral 5 sensestours.com. Or you can WhatsApp them at +919 8456 7446.